Hello everyone, this is going to be my wrap-up for what I read in the month of March. And this was a very productive reading month compared to the last ones. These books read a lot faster than Malazan. And also, it was a reading month that was dominated by this author right here, Miss Robin Hobb. Let's get into it. So this month, in terms of my TBR, basically went to plan. Like, if you remember my TBR from last month, I basically did what I said I would. So that might be the first time that's happened in the history of BookTube. I don't know. It's never happened to me before. Never had actually I think I read it in a slightly different order. But it was pretty close. And the first thing I finished was Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence. Technically, I finished Ship of Magic on, like, March 1st at 1 a.m. But I mentioned that in my last wrap-up, so we're not talking about it. But Grey Sister for Book of the Ancestor, fortunately, just continued to be unexceptional for me. I think the series as a whole was pretty good, but did not live up to my expectations for it. Like, Nona's a good protagonist, but she was, like, weirdly not dynamic, especially in Grey Sister, considering many people seem to have her as, like, their favorite protagonist in the genre, or among them. And it's just, like, everything about it was, like, I don't have any major problems with it. Everything about it was good, but, like, I wouldn't give anything, like, an A if I was ranking the book, like, for how much I enjoyed it. Like, some of the characters were interesting, some of the side characters blurred together. Nona's cool, but just wasn't that interesting of a protagonist to me. And in general, like, Grey Sister was also my least favorite of the three. And part of that is it introduced a new point of view who I just didn't find interesting. Like, that entire point of view reminded me of the meme where someone is, like, standing in the corner and looking at people fighting in a room holding a drink and being like, "They don't know I have a master plan." And it's like, alright. Like, there's characters who have, like, big brain. This character, it just seems like Mark Lawrence was just saying, like, yep, she's gonna be right a lot. And, like, the payoff near the end was pretty good for this character, but there was so many pages of her standing around and thinking of how she has this master plan and just, like, watching things unfold. And I was just like, just tell me the damn plan, or just, I don't need to know about this. And in general, I think that character is one of those who, the more I got in their head, the less interesting they became. Like, they were interesting when I held them at a distance, but then getting in their head a bunch kind of made them less interesting to me. And then, even though I didn't read it right after, I'll talk about Holy Sister now, which was my favorite of the three. This got a 6.1 out of 10, because it still was good. It had good action. Nona's still an interesting protagonist. Zol's a good side character. It was just unexceptional. Then this was 7 out of 10. This, instead of having 2 point of views, kind of followed 2 timelines, and I actually thought that was really well handled. And I really liked the ending. So I thought it was a strong finish, but this is not going to be among, like, my most represented series. I also just, like, find everything, like, in terms of the writing style, very hard to picture, where it's kind of, like, it's a little bit more flowery. It's not, like, you know, super flowery, but it's more flowery than average. And to me, it made it harder to picture things and made, like, I wasn't a huge fan of the writing style in general. So, yeah, it just kind of added up to being an unexceptional series for me, unfortunately. But I was also reading it at the same time as I read The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb and Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. I read both of these after Grey Sister back to back, and oh my god, they are incredibly good. I like Ship of Magic the most, but I like Ship of Magic more than every book, so that's a pretty high bar. Going to be a 9.7 for The Mad Ship. This, I think, really displayed Hobb's relationship writing at her best, to just an outrageous degree, where there are these relationships that are, like, super unique, but also super believable and human. I really think, unfortunately, this book, I say unfortunately, because this, even though it was a masterpiece, 9.7 out of 10, loved it, one of my favorite books ever. It's the most disappointing masterpiece I've ever read, because most people told me it was even better than Ship of Magic, and I didn't like it quite as much. Wasn't quite as emotional of a last third as Ship of Magic was for me, but still Hobb at her best in terms of prose, theme, relationships, characters, world building, and for the most of those, Hobb at her best is better than anyone at her best. So this was incredible, and then Ship of Destiny was even more damn incredible. Once again, the character relationships, like the way this wrapped up, this is one of the best endings to a series I've ever read. I obviously can't talk about it that much because spoiler free, but it thematically fits so well with one of the key themes. And these are just incredible. Like, I have a review for the series up for this already, but you guys know how I feel about Liveship. Liveship is incredible, and none of you should ever skip it. So, after finishing Liveship, I continued the month with The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. And I have a review for this on the channel that I'll probably link in the description. I don't know. Maybe. I'll think about it. And I really like The Poppy War. The Poppy War definitely has some parts of it that, as I talked about, could make it a not-for-everyone read. Like, there's a pretty jarring tone shift from Name of the Wind to 20th century Chinese history and warfare. And the switch takes out 5 pages. So you really, really suddenly go from Name of the Wind to Dead House Gates. I know lots of people have read only one or neither of those. But it does have a pretty jarring toning shift. I just find Rin to be a really interesting protagonist. The framing of the story using Chinese history I find really interesting. I think the ideas it explores about the consequences of war is really well done. The military stuff is really well researched, like I can tell, and it's really well done, especially like the battles. And so all that combines to just this being a book I really liked. It's not among my favorite books ever. It's not among the best character writing I've ever read, but it was a very compelling read for me. I also think one thing that The Poppy War does fantastically is fitting a lot of content into its pages. If you are someone who tends to say, like, oh, you know, this book should have been 300 pages shorter, this 800-page book should have been a 500-page book, this 8-book series should have been a really tight trilogy, this has enough content to be an 8-book series. Like, you could have made these 3 books, assuming book 3 is similar to this, but I've read the first 2. So far, I think, like, these 2 could easily be, like, 6 books in a, like, multi-POV epic that ended up being 3 million words. And instead, the author made the choice to make it a really tight, content-filled trilogy, 99% from one point of view. Now, I tend to like the indulgent books. Like, I'm someone, I didn't think Rhythm of War should have been shorter. I didn't think Toll the Hound should have been shorter. Most books that commonly get complained as should have been shorter, I'm much more likely to think I liked them at that length. But I know a lot of people, since I seem to be in the minority for a lot of that, do read fantasy books all the time and say, if this should have been shorter. If you find yourself doing that, then The Poppy War is probably great. I mean, lots of people probably say Liveship should have been shorter. I think it would have been worse if it was shorter, but if you read something like that and say this should have been shorter books, The Poppy War, in terms of the amount of content for the size of the series, is one of the most content-filled series I've ever read. And now we're going to move on to something way less content. Oh, also, I forgot to mention the ratings. I didn't read these back-to-back, but I gave this an 8 out of 10, and this an 8.3 out of 10. The Dragon Republic, compared to The Poppy War, I think did a much better job of maintaining tension and building tension. Like, my main problem with The Poppy War, which I mentioned in my review, was it didn't feel like there was, like, the connecting scenes from one thing to another. Like, as I said, it went from university to war in, like, 5 pages. And so then when you have the big moment, it's like I didn't have any time to build the tension, and it's very jarring. This had scenes where tension was building, and then when the big moments happen, they hit a lot harder. So I thought in that way it was a better book. It also just, I kind of thought the university scenes were well done, and like Name of the Wind, but this had no similarities to Name of the Wind. If this is the first third is like Name of the Wind, this is 0% Name of the Wind. And yeah, it was another really solid book. Really enjoyed it. It didn't emotionally destroy me, and if you don't emotionally destroy me, it's hard to get higher than an 8 point something, even if I read a very well-constructed book that is super content-filmed, super tight, pacing is great, some really interesting characters. Some of the side characters it's not the best developed side characters ever, but I think by nature, when I say something is a super tight trilogy from one point of view, you have to expect that the focus isn't ridiculously well-developed side characters like you'd see from something like A Song of Ice and Fire or Liveship or Stormlight. But this was actually the last book I read of the month, and in between those two, I continued with Robin Hobb with Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb, which is book 1 of the Tawny Man trilogy. Basically, 9.8 out of 10, one of the best books I've ever read. I'm a broken record at this point. Since Assassin's Quest, every single Hobb book I've read, like 4, and I'm on my 5th right now, has been essentially a masterpiece. Reading this in between the Poppy War and the Dragon Republic is a fantastic example of why making worse things happen is not more emotional to the reader and doesn't hit people more in the feels. Like, in terms of body count, this is incomparably higher than this, and yet this was incomparably higher in terms of emotional impact. Also, this is a Fitz book, so Fitz is the protagonist of this book. And after Farseer, I kind of had the opinion that I didn't get Fitz as, like, being in contention for my favorite character ever. I liked a lot of the side characters in the first Fitz trilogy more than Fitz. I thought Fitz was a very good protagonist, but he wasn't, like, one of my favorite protagonists ever. And in Fool's Errand is where I really got to see why plenty of people have Fitz, Chivalry, Farseer as their favorite character of all time. His voice and development, he's so well realized, especially in this book. I thought, like, Fitz was a very good protagonist, especially in Assassin's Quest and Royal Assassin, but he really just shot up my favorite character list in this book. He's so good. And then there are a bunch of side characters whose names I'm not going to say because it would spoil they lived through the first movie. And, like, the side characters are so well realized, and the dialogue is so good, and the prose is so good. And, like, this book is very slow. It's fair to say in the first 10 chapters, very little happens. It's basically people talking to Fitz. And I loved it. It was fantastic. Because, yeah, it's people talking, but it's the best damn writing of people talking you'll read in the genre. And it's so good. You guys gotta read Robin Hobb. Well, if you like action and fast-paced books, then I guess don't read Robin Hobb. But if you're, like, a character-driven reader, you gotta read Robin Hobb. She's just so good. Anyways, this was not the last book I read in March. That was The Dragon Republic, but I talked about it last because I'm not organized. And then I've started The Golden Fool. I'm 241 pages in. So far, shocking absolutely no one. It's very, very good. I will say the last couple chapters have started to make me feel this might have a little bit of middle book syndrome and be merely fantastic and not like a masterpiece. But Hobb is still on the top of her game in terms of character, prose, and all that stuff. There have been, in the last couple chapters, maybe a tiny bit of like pacing where I'm like, okay, this is not super as interesting as the last 4 books have consistently been. So I think right now, this is kind of projected for me to like it, not quite as much as like Fool's Errand or Liveship, but still more than like 90-something% of books. Anyway, that is all the pages, books, and book I started. I read in March. I think it was about 4,500 pages, and I guess 7 books. Yeah, 7 books plus starting an 8th. So it was a really good reading month. And it also, because I was reading Liveship and Fool's Errand, had some of my favorite books ever. So in terms of quality, even though there were some books I wasn't huge on, it was really high in terms of quality just because of one series mostly. But it do be like that sometimes. So yeah, that is what I got for the month of March. Let me know in the comments what you read in the month of March, what book worked for you, what books didn't, whether you've read any of the books I read here, and what you thought of them. Have a nice day, everyone.